This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 224. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Well, welcome back, everybody. We have an amazing guest, a very, very sweet friend of mine. I am so excited to have on with us Dean Stott from DLCAnxiety. He is a true legend. Dean is on the episode today to tell his story about going from having a fairly severe panic disorder to then creating a mental health platform with over 1 million followers. He's now all about creating mental health awareness, sharing with people. He is such a cool human being, and I'm so honored to have him on today. We talk about his recovery, which you will get a lot of hope from because he really, like everyone who comes on the podcast, he really did the work, which is so cool. But then we also talk about the role that social media can play in mental health recovery, things to look out for, how to handle trolls, the benefits of being online and in especially social media if you have a mental illness. We go through it all, and it's such a great episode. So I'm so excited to have Dean on today. Before we get into the episode, I want to give you the I did a hard thing for the week. This is from Nicole from the Netherlands, and she said, I did a hard thing and I get very anxious when I have to call my doctor. My heart rate goes up and I get all trembly, so I tend to avoid calling the doctor. But because I had been feeling dizzy, I had to get my blood checked. Afterwards, I would have to call the doctors for the results, except I didn't. I told myself if there was anything serious, surely they would call me. I kept this up for almost 2 weeks, and then I suddenly thought I really should call for the result. So I pushed in the numbers to the doctor's office, feeling all kinds of nervous. I was very tempted to just hang up. While I was waiting, I thought, why did I do this? What if I get bad news? But then I had another thought. If it's bad news, all the more reason to hear it. So I hung on and I faced my fears. Turns out I have a vitamin D deficiency. It's not very worrisome, but important to fix. I'm so glad I phoned the doctor, even though I really, in capital letters, didn't want to. Nicole from the Netherlands. Nicole, I love this story. And the thing I love the most, and for those of you who want to submit for this, please do go. I'll leave a link in the show notes. But Nicole, I love that you detailed what got you to do it, how you did it, what thoughts you had to sort of shift up to get yourself to do the hard thing. You walked us through step by step, and it makes my heart want to explode with joy. Thank you so much for sharing it. And amazing, 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 amazing work. I'm so, so impressed. So thank you, Nicole. I love it. Let's get over to the show where we can hear all about Dean's recovery. Well, welcome, Dean. I am so happy to have more. Actually, as much as I'm happy to have you on the podcast, I'm just happy to have chats with you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, Kim.
Yeah. So I feel like I know you and your story pretty well, but I would love for you to share your story with my listeners because I think you have some really, great stuff to share. So can you share whatever you're comfortable about your recovery?
Yeah, sure. So basically, once upon a time, I was going through a panic disorder, so dealing with 4 panic attacks, maybe 4 or 5 panic attacks every single day, like at the worst period. And yeah, I went through a panic disorder, did my own research, a lot of science research, CBT research, mindfulness, meditation, and curated my own plan out of recovery with the guidance of a really good support network in friends and mentors who'd been through an anxiety disorder and come out the other side. And fully recovered from the panic disorder. I then wanted to take that feeling of the support that I was given from my older mentor, the friend that had been through it. I wanted to share that with as many people as I possibly could. So I came up with DLCAnxiety. So at first, I remember sitting down and I was like, how can I get this message out to as many people as possible? And I was thinking of like local support community groups, like the alcohol anonymous groups where people go and there's a supportive network between each other. But then I was just so eager to try and get it even more on a global stage. And I saw that what Instagram does, and I just thought it would fit nicely in there because I did see that there wasn't many mental health communities when I first started. But so I thought there was definitely a nice place for it to fit there. So yeah, I started to tell my story on Instagram. People started to relate, and yeah, it was a snowball effect from there. And now we're over 1 million followers in the community, which is fantastic.
So cool. So cool. So I think that the whole concept here is really to look at, let me backtrack a little bit. So in your recovery, did you do it all on your own? Did you have a therapist? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, so my father passed away, and like any male like in that situation, I bottled up the feelings that I was going through and tried to carry on with going to work and trying to get back into my daily routine, almost like putting it to the back of my mind because I wasn't. I didn't have the techniques to cope with that, and I'd never coped with loss before. So it was from that bottling up of the grief that the panic attack started and occurred. So when I first started having panic attacks, first thing I did was go to the doctors, who then referred me on to a grief counsellor, but just specifically to address the grief side of things, and not the anxiety, not the panic attacks. Regarding the anxiety and panic attacks, that was like me curating, delving into a lot of psychoeducation, which I found very useful, learning about the system and the symptoms of anxiety. Now, I'd done psychology at university and done CBT before, so it's not like I'd never I knew the basic concepts of anxiety, but learning more about it and learning about the scary symptoms, where you think, firstly, when you have a panic attack, you really think that you're going to die. It's a really, really scary thing to go through. And yeah, to start learning about that was super important for my recovery.
Right. And so let's talk about community. Why do you feel the community aspect was so important for you? Tell me about the idea of creating a mental health community for someone, let's say, who's suffering with panic disorder or grief or OCD or anxiety. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so when I was going through panic disorder, I felt isolated, I felt alone, and I didn't really want to bring it up to people around me because I just didn't think they'd be able to relate to me. I thought these symptoms was just something that I was going through and something that I'd have to stick with for the rest of my life. I thought that was me, that I was going to be Dean who has these panic attacks, and I was going to have to navigate my way through my daily routine. And I think when I opened up to my mentor, a close friend of mine who was working with me at the time, when I opened up and he shared his experience, it was like the biggest weight off my shoulders, knowing that someone else had been through exactly, not the exact same story, but had experienced all these scary symptoms, had felt isolated, felt alone, but more importantly, overcome an anxiety disorder. And I think it was that inspiration and motivation that really helped me on my recovery. So, yeah, having an important... So DLC is Dean's like-minded community. So it's a community full of like-minded people, on anxiety recovery journeys. Some people are at the end, like myself. I don't deal with panic attacks anymore. But some people are at the start, some people are in the middle, and they can all relate to each other no matter where they are on that journey. And then what's beautiful about the community is where you see them sharing tips and experiences that work for them. And I know you speak about it highly as well, like having an anxiety toolkit, because some tools might work for one person, but they might not work for another. But I think it's very important to get as much information out there about all the different range of tools, so then each person can individualize their own recovery.
Yeah, it's so important, more now than ever, I think, given that, the degree of mental illness is so high given COVID and isolation and everything. So, okay, so you have this platform. I love it. I loved being a part of your community. Why do you think that is like the most important piece, the community aspect? Can you share a little bit about what you see and hear from your community and why that's so important?
Yeah, so again, so many DMs from people saying that they just feel connected. They feel like hope. They feel inspiration. They feel motivation. Not only from me, who's at the head of, like the founder of the community, but of all these people that are going through it. Do you know what I mean? Over 1 million people worldwide. We know mental health. It doesn't have a face. It doesn't have a color. It doesn't have a social structure. It doesn't matter what you're working as. It can affect anyone, and I think that's why it's really important and became an integral part of the community was the interview series that I started doing with, firstly, mental health professionals from around the world. So CBT professionals like yourself, Kim. Then we've had psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors, and having just as much information about anxiety and anxiety recovery, I think has been a super important part. So again, it's not only having this community, it's having the psychoeducation and I'm in a real good place now where I can get guests on who have, do you know what I mean, that are world renowned within the space of anxiety. And also we've had so many like celebrities, musicians and actors, actresses come on and tell their own mental health stories where they've struggled or where they've been vulnerable. And that's really related to the community as well. Because obviously people look at celebrities, people look at musicians, and they might not know that just too, they can be going through a mental health disorder. Yeah. So yeah, having people like that come on and tell their own stories has been super, super beneficial for everyone as well.
Yeah. See, the cool thing is that the science, this is why I'm really fascinated in this, is the science of self-compassion says that there are 3 components, right, of self-compassion, one being mindfulness, the second being common humanity. In that, reminding yourself that you're not alone in your struggles is the second most important part of self-compassion, the third being self-kindness. Now, the reason I love this is I know for myself in the areas that I struggle is if I look at an account and I can see that 1 million people follow a mental health account, it gives me like a sense of common humanity that there are 1 million people struggling with something, right? If you see an OCD account and it's got 60,000 followers, you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of people. I must not be alone in my struggle. Or an eating disorder account. Or I love some of the autism accounts. I think those, it shows that it gives you permission to see that you're not alone. And I love that, right? It's such a beautiful piece of the work.
Yeah, and especially where you just mentioned the self-kindness as well. I think that's an important subject just to speak about, is that when you're going through an anxiety disorder, you have this inner critic that's telling you that you're never going to come out of it, that you're not good enough, that maybe this is happening to you for a reason. And like you say, when you come across these communities of people who are on their own journey of recovery, might be a few more steps ahead than you, and you see that they have a positive outlook, some of them on recovery, and they are making steps. I think, yeah, knowing to change that inner narrative and have that self-love and compassion is super important when it comes to anxiety disorders.
Yeah. And that's the benefit of social media right there, right? I think social media gets a really bad rap but we have to sort of weigh the pros and cons, because there are lots of pros, right?
Yeah, no,
Like, there
100%.
Yeah.
What I'd say is, this is how I define it, is that if we just take Instagram and our mental health community, so all the mental health accounts that are doing great, I see us like just like a safe haven corner of Instagram where people can go to and feel supported and connected and learn more about mental health in general. On an app that you say can have a negative effect on people. And I think this is, people speak about the algorithm and obviously us all guessing what the algorithm's going to do next. But I think we can actually use the algorithm in our favor. And if you just bear with me on this, like, if you think about all the accounts that you're following, so if you're following all positive mental health accounts or self-compassion or self-care, self-love, then the algorithm's then going to spew that out to you in your own feed. So what are you doing? You're starting to change that in a narrative, like in your digital world, because you open up your app and you start to see all this self-love and positivity. So you can definitely use the algorithm. So I think it's super important taking a look at who you're following and seeing, does that benefit your mental health? And if it doesn't, then I don't think you should be following them.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I just was saying yesterday is that I was just scrolling mindful. Like, I'm rarely on social media just to scroll. I'm usually there to do the work I do. Mm-hmm. My son was sick. I was sitting there wasting time. But the cool thing is the suggested was all cool stuff. Like, it was really cool. I was like, oh, I love all these new ideas and these new looks. And I was really appreciating what was being suggested to me, even though I know there's some controversy around that. It was very cool.
And you can imagine if somebody's just starting at the beginning of an anxiety disorder and they've got this negative outlook and they're isolated and they haven't connected, then the algorithm may be spewing them not the right information. So I think it's important to really highlight the best we can our corner of Instagram, this mental health community that's doing so great. And it's a new wave of mental health support, really, and much needed, like you say, with COVID and everything that everyone's still going through. I think over the next 5-10 years, it's going to be more needed than ever.
Right. Absolutely. I can't agree more. I mean, I don't even think we have the stats yet on what mental illness is like from COVID and mostly the isolation of COVID. So I 100% agree. So let's step outside of the online world and let's talk generally. Mm-hmm. How did you find this community, not the online community, but as you were going through recovery, did you tell them about your struggles? Did they come to you? How would you suggest people tell somebody about their struggles? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my body and my mind and everything was telling me not to open up about anxiety and not to speak to anyone and to keep it as like an inner struggle, because everything with anxiety, we know it's all internal, it's all inwards. We're so ruminating on our thoughts, feelings and sensations. So it doesn't make sense to then speak to other people. It's not natural to do that. So I had to go against that. And I just started to open up and not feel ashamed to tell people what I was going through. I think I got to a point where it felt like I was struggling too much for just me to be going through it. So I felt like I had to. So my advice to people would be, speak to the people around you, have a support network. You may come across people who dismiss your anxiety and mental health, and it's super important to know that just because they dismiss it, it doesn't mean anything. It's just, it may be their views. They might not have the education on mental health. So yeah, if you get dismissed, that shouldn't stop you from opening up, because I know that people often, especially in my community, say, well, I feel like I can't tell people because if I tell my parents, for example, they just tell me to continue to get on with it, that I don't have these issues. So I think that when that happens and you have parents, then it's important to put mental health boundaries in place. Obviously, we can't like, especially if we're living with our parents, we can't like just move out or whatever, or if we're young. So we have to put these boundaries in place and have a support network around us. So if you're younger, it could be someone in your education system, it could be a support worker, or it could be the online communities like we mentioned.
Yeah, that's interesting, because what's been on my mind lately, particularly in the online space, is what to do when you have been dismissed. Now, that happens from parents and loved ones, but I think it does happen on social media as well, right? Like you will have, and sort of the message I've been trying to give is, if it's helpful, take it. And if it's not helpful, leave it, right? Because a lot of people will come to my platform and say, I'm freaking out because I just read this, which goes against what you're saying. And I don't know who to believe, right? And they're doing the best they can with what they've got. So I think that it's important for people, even on the online, is to also dismiss bad advice online, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so many people get dismissed online, don't they? But I think you gave some great advice, Kim, and that was anybody can write anything on social media. It doesn't mean that it's true, does it? So we need to take in what someone's saying to us, but if it doesn't fit our way of thinking or it doesn't benefit us, then it's okay to reject it. Just like if we think of anxiety and thoughts, and you get these irrational thoughts, we get this irrational thought and we don't believe it. What do? We don't accept it. We can reject and replace it. And that's what we should do with the information around us. So if we see a negative comment towards us, it's so easy, isn't it? It's so natural for us to react in a negative way, because that's the way we're built. Do you know what I mean? It's our protective system there to try and protect us. But yeah, if it's not benefiting you, then it's okay to step away and move away from it.
Okay, so let's talk about the dreaded trolls, because that's the perfect segue. So I found what I would love for you and I to talk about, and if it's okay, be as open as you can, but let's talk about the mental impact of having a troll, because I think you could have a bully at school, and you could have a bully for a boss, or you could have a bully online. And I think it's similar in how we can internalize it. So I had a troll for over a year now who's pretty aggressive. And most of my people know, aggressive and awful. And at the beginning, I took it completely personally, right? Like completely personally. I thought everyone was just going to hate me. And it was it completely kind of, the whole saying about you have to break something to put it back together the right way. That's how it felt for me, right? Because obviously I had built my platform and what I do, my businesses, on this idea that if I just do good and I'm kind all the time, no one will ever hate me. It's impossible to hate me if I'm kind. I think it was this belief system that I had, and that got shattered into millions of pieces because there were people who really didn't like me, right? And so I think that I'm glad it broke and it got shattered, because I got to put it back properly, of I had to restructure that belief. But that was really, really hard. And having someone online say such horrible things, I was really, really had a difficult time of not taking it personally. So can you share what your experience of online trolls and that kind of thing has been?
Yeah, sure. So with the DLC community, it's sort of, especially when the first lockdown happened, we had the celebrities and musicians, they all started to gain control back of their own social media accounts. So we saw a lot of celebrities sharing mental health stuff, which is amazing, because it's sharing shining a big light on everything to do with mental health. So I saw an exponential growth within that period of the community. I remember it was on either speaking on interviews with people or just on lives. And again, your mind zones in. Doesn't matter how many positive messages you're seeing on your Instagram lives, for example. It's only natural if you see one negative comment for your mind to then just zone in on that. And I remember the first time that happened to me, and I was really taken back, because I was putting 23 out of 24 hours into being on this community and helping like the best I can, sharing like a very vulnerable story to do with my father passing and then an anxiety disorder. And I thought I was being vulnerable and open and honest. And like you say, just trying to give as much love and support for people as I could. And then to see that someone or some people were being negative towards this, it was dismay. I couldn't believe it. It didn't feel real. I was like, how come, why are they saying negative things towards me? So it was definitely a learning curve. I'll always remember the first time that happened. Over time, it has got better. Like you say, you managed to structure and rearrange things, and you managed to not take these things personally and sort of look from the outside that the people that are spreading hate or being negative, they may be hurting themselves. And hopefully, my take on it now, Kim, is that even if these people are spreading hate and being horrible on my community towards me, or especially towards me, is that hopefully they may get some good out of one of the other interviews with someone else, because I know that these people, they're in need of mental health support themselves, and for whatever reason they haven't been able to get it. And I always think that if they're giving me hate, I can now take it, and hopefully, like, they might see something that benefits them. But it's very hard. It has been very hard to change my perspective on that. It was not an easy road.
Yeah, that's hard for me. I think on my end, I just had to keep reminding myself that while the words are about me, it's really not about me. It's a lot about them and their struggle. And, you know, if the way I kind of work through it, and maybe you could tell me like what you think as you see the troll, like how do you think about it? For me, when I see really awful, hurtful comments, I first remind myself, this person had to suffer a great deal to be spreading this much hate, right? Like to understand that they had to, no one who's had a really easy life is jumping onto the internet and spending hours spreading hate on people. It's usually that they've been through an immense, and that was really helpful for me, compassion-wise, of just to be like, I actually have compassion for you. You've obviously been through the ringer. And then the second piece for me is, and this was the hard part, and I'm curious, I really want to know your thought, was to start to trust that people will trust me, that people will see the real me, not the me that person is saying I am, by me being consistent and showing up as me. And that was a hard piece, because at the beginning I was like, but what if they don't trust me? But the consistency has been really helpful for me. But I think the truth is that has also been really helpful for me translate into the real world.
I was just going to say, because it's your inner critic, isn't it? Like you say, wanting for everyone to relate to everything that you're putting out there, all the amazing stuff that you're putting out there, and the last thing you want is somebody trying to discredit that, because, you know what I mean, all we're trying to do is help the people around us. So yeah, it's that inner critic and working on our inner selves. And when I see a troll online now, I just tend to leave them be. I think it's just leave them to do what they want. I think we know that our communities know what we're about. They know how much we give to our communities. They know how much support and love that we give everyone on a continuous day. And like you said, you can't stop these people, but also just because they're writing something, it doesn't mean that it's true, which I thought was beautiful for you to say.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, I think that is a huge part of our mental wellness, is how we relate to people, right? Like how we're in relationships. So even if we've got panic disorder, I was thinking about this the other day, is we've had a really, really rough house here in the Quinlan house this week. It's been pretty chaotic, lots of sickness, lots of scary COVID scares and so forth. And there was a time where I would have lashed out because of my own anxiety, right? I would have been like really kind of snarky to my husband because he goes to work and he doesn't have to handle it. And I would often displace my anxiety on anger, right? Like just kind of snotty. And that happens a lot. I hear a lot of people talking about, like, just in daily life, like, I'm really struggling with, because my partner and I aren't getting along because everyone's anxious and so forth. So I think it is helpful to be in relationship with people who do have their own struggles. Like I said, it happens online, but it's also happening at home.
Yeah, and it can just happen on a day-to-day basis. Kind of like a lot of people say that they can't deal with people when they're being negative or being towards them in real life, but it's about taking a step back and knowing that the person who's spreading that negativity towards you, that maybe they're having a really rough time at home with their partner. Maybe they've got troubles with their job, money. It could be anything. Maybe they were traveling to work and they got cut up. And we're all a product of our emotions at that time. And emotions, as we know, they come and go, and it doesn't curate who we are as a person. So if someone's being angry towards you and negative towards you, it's about taking a step back and knowing that it's more on them again, and it's more on what they're experiencing and the feelings and emotions, and putting the correct boundaries in place. But it's really hard to do. I'm not saying that it's easy to do. It is super, super hard, especially when someone's coming at you with negativity. Your first line of defense is do you know what I mean, is to attack normally, isn't it? Or to take a massive step back. So yeah, it takes a lot of practice, but it can be done.
Mm-hmm. So talk to me about, you're probably the one person who would know the answer to this. Can you share with us about managing mental illness with social media? How might someone have a healthy relationship with social media and the use of social media?
So even I have to put boundaries in myself, because like you say, everything that I do is on Instagram, like 99% of it. And if I'm not working on Instagram, I'm working on my website, which again is online. So yeah, putting boundaries in place is super important. Having rests away from social media. What we mentioned earlier about following accounts that really benefit you and have a positive impact on you, and just getting rid of the negative accounts that are not making you feel good. You don't want to go onto social media and not feel good, because we all know we spend way too much time on social media. And if we're spending that time looking at negativity, then that's what's it going to do. It's going to put our mood in that sense, and we could really spiral into just a state of being in a negative state just by what we're consuming, isn't it? It's like when people speak about the news and say, oh, well, I can't watch that because it affects my mental health. Social media is exactly the same, but probably more so, because we're spending more time on it. It's literally part of who we are now.
Right. What would you say to someone who uses social media to cope with their anxiety, meaning to distract against it or to get them through their panic? Do you have any thoughts on managing it for anxiety?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. So I always go back to thinking, at the start of my panic disorder, if there was communities like ours out there, would it have been beneficial for me? And the number one answer is yes, 100%. It would have been an eye-opener. I would have felt like I wasn't alone. I would have felt motivated and encouraged that I can continue. But if you're using anxiety communities as a way to not do the hard work, then I think it can be detrimental. I think anxiety recovery is about doing the hard work. Now, a lot of people, I've just done a post on this, unfortunately can't have the access towards therapy, which we know has a massive benefit on mental health. If we speak about anxiety, the latest science is that medication and a combination with CBT therapy has the best results. Now, that doesn't mean for everyone, but some people may do better with medication, some people may do better with therapy. So I think that having a community to help you and understand the psychoeducation behind it is great. But if you're using it as a distraction to try and distract you from feeling anxious and dealing with the anxiety head on, and that's when it can become detrimental. So I often say that there's so much information, and you can obviously maybe shine a light on this, Kim, but what would you say to people who say that they can't access therapy? Maybe it's a money thing, maybe it could be anything, couldn't it? Do you believe that these people can still recover? Because there seems to be a narrative online that therapy is the only way forward. Now, I think that's an unhealthy way of looking at it, because we know that anxiety recovery, there's so many different routes out of it, and it all leads to the same end goal, doesn't it? Which is anxiety recovery. So what would you say to the people that can't access therapy? Would you be still giving them hope?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm 1000% I would give hope. I myself have had therapy for some things, but I really didn't feel like therapy for other issues were helpful. And I felt it was better for me to actually work through a workbook, listen to a ton of podcasts. Like I'm a real mix. I've had being blessed and privileged to have some amazing therapy. Mm-hmm. But some of my mental illness, I really needed to do on my own. But I did them through, like I said, a workbook, a support group. Some were online courses. I mean, that's kind of why I created ERP School, was because people that were turning them away to nothing, right? But what was really interesting about ERP School and CBT School is just recently, out of the blue, a bunch of people have reached out to me and said, I wanted just to let you know that got me through right up back on my feet. It's so wonderful to hear those stories, because otherwise you don't know them and you didn't realize what an impact. So no, I absolutely believe, I'm a real big believer in workbooks. I struggled with workaholism, and that a workbook for workaholism was huge for me, and perfectionism. These are two really, really important, things that I use that did not require therapy at all.
Yeah, so I like you, Kim. I like to be guided by the science. So I know obviously how important therapy and how life-changing it can be for some people with anxiety, but also I think there's still a lot of stigma around medication when it comes to anxiety, especially online. And yeah, I think we need to do a little bit more work on that, because I think anxiety medication's being dismissed more so. And yeah, maybe that's another conversation that we can have in the future. But I didn't go through therapy with my own anxiety disorder, with the panic attacks. Mine was going online. I think you have to go to the trusted site. So over here you have the National Health Service, which had a ton of resources, all scientific, proven, all credible from the correct sources. And I think if you're researching and looking at all the correct things, I think that can be really powerful for you. So if you can't access therapy, there is of course there's still hope. Of course you can still recover. And that my message to everyone is, I did it. So if I can, I'm just a regular guy, you can do it too.
I love that. I love that. Just because I know, I'm thinking of the person listening here is like, well, how did you do it? Like, I know we haven't got a ton of time, but could you just say, like, how did you muster up the courage on your own to face your fears?
It's a great question. And I do have my book coming out, which is Greater Than
All right.
Yeah, so the book is called Greater Than Panic. It's the number one question that I've been asked since day one of starting up the anxiety community, and that was, what is your story and how did you get from 4 panic attacks a day to being the head of like DLCAnxiety and being the face of the interviews and not having anxiety, not having panic attacks, obviously still having anxiety. That's a message that I think isn't hammered home enough, whereas the goal of anxiety recovery is not never to feel anxious again. I think people often are misguided and have misinformation especially at the start of an anxiety disorder, thinking that the goal is to never feel anxious again. The goal is to change your behavior to when you're feeling anxious and make sure that it doesn't have a detrimental impact on your day-to-day living. So yeah, I go right back to the basics. I go back to speaking about my father's death, which was obviously a really terrible time, and it brought out a lot of emotions. But it was also, I think it was important for me to go back and like just explore it again. And I speak about my relationship with the doctor. I think is, again, another message that I like to hit home is that if you're dealing with any physical symptoms to do with or emotional symptoms to do with anxiety, your first port of call has to be the doctor. Because we know that anxiety disorders can mimic other things, and so it's super important for a medical professional, a GP, a doctor, to run diagnostic tests to make sure that everything else is okay. And then when they tell you that it is okay, you can sit down with the doctor and you can start to plan your journey out of recovery, which may be therapy, it may be self-help, it may be meditation, mindfulness, exercise, medication. There's so many different routes, but yeah. My number one message is if you're dealing with physical symptoms and you haven't had them checked out, you have to go to the doctor. So I speak about my relationship with the doctor. I speak about curating my own anxiety toolkit. So what worked for me and the research and the science behind each thing that I was trying and how it had a impact for me. And I speak about exposure therapy and how that was really beneficial for me, but doing it not guided by a therapist. Now, if you look at the science, they would say that the best effects of exposure therapy is guided with a therapist, but I didn't personally have a therapist in my journey. But if you can have a therapist, I definitely recommend that that's the best route to go down. But I speak about how exposure therapy worked for me, and I speak about the hiccups on that road to recovery and what recovery looked like, what it meant to me. And then I speak about the anxiety community, how I wanted to spread the message and get that message across to as many people as I possibly can. And it takes me to present day.
I can't wait. That's so exciting. So tell me about the name of the book.
Greater Than Panic. So that's the message, that you are greater than panic. Just because you have feelings of panic, if you're having panic attacks or panic disorders, it doesn't mean that you're broken. It doesn't mean that you can't be fixed. Joe, there's nothing to fix because you're not broken. So yeah, you are greater than panic. All life things that you all the dreams, aspirations, careers, travel, love, money, whatever it is that you want, you can get. Doesn't matter that you're going through panic or have panic attacks, or if you've been through a panic disorder, the message is that you're greater than panic.
Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to leave you. I feel like that's the perfect way for us to end out. Is there anything else you want to share with us? Any links or how people can hear about you?
Just DLCAnxiety over on Instagram and the website www.DLCAnxiety.com. And yeah, I'd just like to thank you, Kim, for obviously inviting me on here. And I'd like to thank you for everything that you're doing in the mental health space. CBT is super important to me as an integral part to my recovery. And yeah, I'm just super grateful for our connection on Instagram and just everything that you're doing.
Thank you. I feel so blessed that we kind of randomly got to meet. You know, it's such a blessing. So thank you. I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I'm sure you got so much from that. Before we finish up, let's do the review of the week. This is from Disc Golf Nate. They gave 5 stars and they said, as Kimberly would say, it's not necessarily a substitute for in-person therapy, but it's still a very powerful tool. I've used this podcast in conjunction with my therapist and some books, but this podcast brings me the most peace. Thank you so much, Disc Golf Nate. I am so honored for that amazing review. And yes, this should not substitute therapy, but my hope is it gives you some tools, some skills, some hope, some support, some joy and compassion into your recovery. So I'm so honored to have this time with you. I will see you all next week. Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.